Welcome everyone to our continuing series of town hall meetings this evening. As is our standard process, we're going to spend a moment to thank our Northern California sponsor, Qualcomm. We have a little bit of standard housekeeping for these kind of calls. Everybody's muted. It is just an easy way to keep track of keeping everything managed. If you do have a question, please take advantage of the question feature. There should be a box in the GoToWebinar tool that allows you to type in a question, and we'll try to take care of them. We may answer them in line while the meeting's going on, or we may pause and try to answer them verbally. This session is—
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
I don't actually see your slides.
Yep, let me start.
You're showing slides, you might want to make sure that everybody can see those.
Yeah, it's kind of a good thing. Monitor one, that one. How's that?
That's great, we can all see it now.
Excellent. So this presentation is being recorded, and we will post both a copy of the slides and the recording on the NorCal FTC website. So if somebody does happen to miss the call, feel free to point them towards those resources so that everybody can keep up with where things are. We have today myself, Mark Edelman, and Diane France. We are the First Tech Challenge staff for Northern California. Easiest way to get a hold of us is to use the FTC at playingatlearning.org mail address. That'll actually go to both of us. Whoever's available will be able to help you out. We have just a real brief agenda tonight. We just really wanted to sort of take a moment and catch everyone up with how things stand right now. So we're going to talk a little bit about the status of the teams, where registration stands. We're going to talk about the status of our current events. We'll talk some about what's coming up. We'll spend a couple of minutes talking about the one first event we did, our Google qualifying tournament, just because we want to give everybody a chance to understand how that went. And then we should have plenty of time for people to be able to ask questions and to have just sort of a general discussion. As of today, we are at 156 registered teams in Northern California. 138 have actually taken care of answering our team survey. If you're in that small subset that hasn't filled out that survey yet, please do. There's some information we need to be able to understand how we're going to proceed through the season, but it also gives us information that we can feed back to our sponsors, right? They like to understand what kind of teams they're helping support. So please do take time to take care of that survey. Currently, we're looking at around 1,300 students. Out of our 156 teams, 76 are what we would call community teams. They're not directly associated with a school. 41 are public school teams, and 10 are private school teams. I guess I'd say that's out of the 138 that have answered the survey. We need your input to make those numbers better for our sponsors. All right, status. We still have 11 events on the calendar planned coming up in the next 2.5 months. We have canceled several events so far. So if you've been paying attention, you would have seen that so far 6 of our 17 events have had to be canceled. Right now, there are 2 fundamental criteria for why we will cancel events. Less than 12 teams registered. First says we need to have a minimum of 12 to be able to hold an event. And then the other criteria we're going to use right now is what is the COVID lockdown status for our region? Okay, so we managed to get one event going at the beginning of December. The COVID infection rate changed during that time. The ICU bed capacity went down. The state put us into the regional stay-at-home order setup. At that point, we were faced with not being able to field the rest of the December events, so we went ahead and canceled them. Those same regional stay-at-home orders are still in place for most of the state. And for Northern California FTC, that includes the Bay Area region, the San Joaquin Valley region, and the Greater Sacramento region. Of those, Bay Area and San Joaquin Valley are still in the stay-at-home orders, regional stay-at-home orders. Sacramento has managed to get itself out, but at this point, it is still effectively all purple, which means they're in the most impacted of the criteria for the region. The regional stay-at-home orders don't allow gatherings of any type for people from separate households. And so it presents a real challenge for us in order to be able to support holding events, even the remote event, because it requires at least some fraction of the team to get together to be able to operate the robot. There are some exceptions for schools that have waivers in place prior to the regional stay-at-home orders being implemented. We are looking at possibly coming out with in the next few weeks with some surveys to help us understand more about where our teams are and what we can or can't do going forward. So what you're seeing is we're running into a lot of situations now where we're sort of back against the wall trying to figure out how to keep moving. So for our December events, it was pretty clear there really was no option except to cancel. We have spent a lot of time trying to understand how to work with this, and we've sort of put together a sort of a protocol for how we're going to deal with it. We've set ourselves a timeline for when we will make the decision of whether or not an event's going to go forward. Fundamentally right now, Wednesday prior to the match play window opening is the time that we will make a decision. So with the remote event structure, our events, it's a closing, the judging and closing on a weekend day, and the 7 days prior to that are the window for match play. So if the Wednesday before the match play for an event, things are in a criteria where we either don't have enough teams, less than 12 teams registered, or we have at least 12, but there's not enough that aren't under regional stay-at-home orders. So as an example, if I looked today and I was going to make a decision today based on our Sacramento qualifier, which is coming up end of this month, the event date is the 30th. The match play opens up on the 24th. It currently has 24 teams. And so based on that criteria, we would be able to go ahead, except that of the 24 teams, 20 are in the Bay Area region. So they're in a regional stay-at-home order. There's one in the San Joaquin Valley. It's in a regional stay-at-home order. And there are 3 in the greater Sacramento region. So in theory, they might be able to play. At that point, it looks to us like 21 of the 24 teams are unable to participate. And so we would likely make the decision to cancel that event. So this coming Wednesday on the 20th is the decision date for that. So we are trying to be as flexible as we can and trying to delay the decision as late as we can. The Wednesday was selected to give us enough time to be able to communicate with the teams that are affected and communicate with the tournament directors that are affected and the volunteers that are affected so that we can really be able to help everybody adapt as best we can. From our perspective, this is absolutely frustrating, and we believe it's got to be frustrating for all the teams that are being impacted. We're really, right now, we have more questions than we have answers. If we cancel too many events, should we extend the season? Right at the beginning of this season, we did sort of a pre-survey of teams to figure out how far should we push our season out under the current conditions. And the pretty strong feedback we got is please don't extend into May. So right now, what we've put onto the calendar is qualifying tournaments through March and a championship tournament in April. Does that need to change, right? Are we going to run out of opportunities for teams to be able to play? We may have to make some adaptations to how we manage how many times teams get to play. Our current scheme, we allow teams to play up to 3 times. Well, if we don't have enough qualifying tournaments to support that model, we may have to look at limiting teams to no more than twice. And as I mentioned earlier, we are looking at running a survey to get a better idea of how everyone is working, what we can or can't do to support, and what we need to do to help support the events, as well as all of you. Just to help you understand that we don't take this process lightly, canceling events has a significant impact on playing and learning. So you may not understand this completely, but the fees that we collect for the tournaments, a portion of that goes to support the operating expenses for playing and learning. This is how we operate, right? You may think we're supporting you, but it's a mutual support. You're supporting us as well. Each event is a loss of 24 teams worth of registrations, about $2,400. 6 events canceled so far, just in round numbers, that's about $15,000 that's not coming in, right? It's lost revenue. The truth is, with how things are working, we're still incurring expenses. We still have rent, we still have payroll, we still have trophies that we're ordering for all these events. We don't take this process lightly. We're trying to do what we can to make sure we support the community, but really making sure that we're also respectful of what we need to do to be helping to minimize the impact of this pandemic. And if we cancel enough events, we may need your help in making sure that NorCal FTC survives for next season. So stay tuned. Okay, on to a little bit happier. We did have our first successful event. We ran a qualifying tournament hosted by the wonderful folks from Google. The positive was it was it was an experiment. We were the first qualifying tournament to run in the country. We were the first to run in all of North America. And so there was a lot of learning opportunities. I'll phrase it that way. We spent a lot of time trying to understand how to operate the event virtually, remotely. And the one wonderful thing was we effectively ran on schedule. The scoring system worked, the judging schedule worked, the teams had good interactions with the judges. We had teams opt in to being able to do what we called pit sharing. And the teams that participated in that responded very positively. We had one coach send us a short note, very grateful for the opportunity. He's coaching a rookie team, and his rookie team had never interacted with another FTC team before they did that pitch sharing. So that was very positively received. There are examples of the kinds of things that teams pre-shared to be able to share with each other on the first, I guess they're actually on the Playing and Learning website. They're linked from the NorCal FTC website. We did have a few hiccups, right? It's a lot of technology being used in ways that maybe aren't quite standard, but we understood all our problems as they were happening. We're able to adapt and adjust during the event, and we've got everything figured out, we think, going into the next event. So we're expecting the next event to run really quite smoothly. It was a lot of fun, and we're really sad we weren't able to keep it going. I guess that'd be the way I would say it. With that, that's the end of what I've got in terms of prepared material. We've got a lot of time to be able to answer questions, and I will tell you that you may have questions that we don't have answers for. All right, let's see. First up, my team can run within one household. I'm hoping more teams are able as well. Can you use this to work around the regional stay-at-home restrictions? So this is exactly the kind of information we're hoping to be able to understand from the survey that's coming. So, make sure that you answer. We're probably going to actually send this survey out directly to Coach 1, Coach 2, and we're going to look for exactly one answer from every team. And it's really quite important, because if we do have enough that we can get to that level to make it playable, we may be able to field some events. One of the things we need to be mindful of is we don't really want to leave teams behind. And so if we're not able to get enough of a share of our total teams into that mode of operation, we still may not be able to move forward, right? It's not about one team or one event. It's about all the teams and all of the events, right? They all feed together into our championship tournament.
Mark, you might want to comment on the forum update on who's allowed to be human player in case people haven't seen it.
Yeah, so if you aren't reading the FTC Q&A forum, I would strongly recommend you do. Um, it is a place for to get answers and updates on how things are being managed. But one accommodation that the FTC staff and the game design committee talked through for this season is an allowance for people other than student team members to be the human player in the match, right? And so that allows for one less potential other student to need to be there. So it could be a sibling to one of the students that's driving, or it could be a parent to one of the students that is driving, right? That person would still need to understand all the rules for the role and abide by those rules, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a student team member, right? So there is a little bit of flexibility with that. So, you know, my next question is right along that line. It's how many people does it actually take to run a match? That depends on what the team's built in terms of robot. So best case, they've built a robot that can be driven by one person. So there's one robot driver. Next up, we have to have a human player. Next up, we have to have field personnel, right? There has to be somebody scoring the match. So the bare minimum realistically is 3 people. And if the team has built a robot that needs 2 drivers, bare minimum is 4 people, right? So that's our threshold for what we're looking at. 3 to 4 people at a minimum to run a match. To fit within the current regional stay-at-home orders, those 4 people would all have to come from one household. It can't be your neighbor and your kids. It can't be 2 kids from different households. It all would have to be 3 or 4 people from one household. Okay, let's see, next up. What are the odds of the World Championship for the Ultimate Goal season? So I've been trying to get my magic 8 ball to help me understand exactly what it's going to look like for the potential for a World Championship. I really don't have a way of being able to predict. Can you tell me how fast the vaccine rollout's going to work and how quickly that's going to propagate into a lowered infection rate and more ICU bed availability, and all the things we're hearing about on an ongoing basis? If you can answer all those questions for me, I might be able to give you a probability about whether or not or when or where there'll be an Ultimate Goal World Championship. But until then, all I can say is hang on. Everybody would like to see it happen. What we're actually going to be able to do is really very much still up in the air. Oh, let's see. Next up, we've got how are alliances going to work this season? So that's a question that we answered very early in the season. There's 2 different models of gameplay for different regions. There's the traditional model that involves alliances, and there is the remote event model, which does not. If you have not taken the time yet to read the remote versions of the game manuals, please do. There's a whole bunch of resources on the first website and on our website that talk about how the remote event model is going to work this year. But remote event basically is one team driving one robot on a fraction of the normal playing field. Go ahead and read through those. If you still don't understand, send us an email at ftc@playingatlearning.org, and we'll help you get connected with the resources that should make it more understandable. Let's see, next up in the string of questions is in remote events, do teams decide the color and starting location? Yes. So what you have available may determine your color for you. So if your team bought a blue half field, it's hard but not impossible to play a red half field. It's hard to switch back and forth, almost impossible to switch back and forth. But so if you bought a blue half field, would make sense to play the blue version of the remote event. And you get to pick which of the two starting locations for the blue in the traditional world for the Blue Alliance, right? So you do completely have that control. And the next question is so we should only build one side of the field. So the remote event field is not a half a field. It's actually a little bit more than half a field. There's a whole bunch of resources. Take the time to read through them. They do a pretty good job of explaining what's required. There's one document that's called the remote field requirements. That one does a really nice job of explaining what the options are for how to put together that resource for your team to be able to practice and to be able to play its remote matches.
Mark, we have a couple of questions about how the rescheduling is going.
As much as we would like to think about rescheduling, our challenge right now is calendar dates.
I'm sorry, not the rescheduling of the dates. When teams get canceled out, when they re-register for other events, how does that work?
Okay. So we don't have an easy way of giving them priority. What's happening right now, our normal cancellation policy, you'd lose your registration fee and your play would still count. We're trying to be a bit more flexible, accommodating, supportive of our teams. What's happening right now is if a team's event is canceled for either of the two reasons, not enough teams or COVID constraints bring us below viable team levels, canceled for either of those two reasons, your play count gets set back by one, right? So if you had registered for one event, you would be back in the situation of having no plays in your history. If you'd registered for two events, you'd be back into having just one in your history. The registration fees that you paid, we hold in anticipation of you registering. If we get to the end of the season and you haven't registered for an event, we will refund those fees. So we're trying to do everything we can to be as accommodating as we can and still try to think about pushing forward into an event. So it doesn't give you exactly priority to sign up, but it does put you back into the sort of the preferred grouping, right? The way our registration system works, first chance at registering for any month goes to teams that haven't played at all yet, haven't registered for any events yet, right? And it progresses from there to have registered for one, have registered for two. So it puts you back into a more preferred state. Let's see. So while hosting a tournament, can anyone on the team be the MC in the award ceremony? Does it have to be a coach? So does not have to be a coach. Probably isn't really a question so much for this forum. We do like to have exciting voices. So we want to make sure we have a couple of people. What we found is it really works well for two voices working as MCs to play off of each other. It's like it creates sort of a conversation as the award ceremony is going on. Does not have to be a coach. It could be any volunteer. One of the things that does happen this year with this system, we are a little bit constrained. All of the volunteers have to be background screened to work with the remote systems. So it would need to be not a minor. So it needs to be somebody at least 18 years old. Let's see, is there a restriction on who that field personnel can be? So there isn't a strict restriction. We do want to have somebody who is responsible and attention to detail oriented. They are effectively wearing several hats that normally are filled by a variety of people during an event. So they're helping with the field reset, they're helping with the sort of game announcing that goes on to help get the match started. They're helping to manage the scoring system, and they're actually helping to actually do the scoring itself. And so there's a lot to that, and that's why we want somebody responsible. In the ideal case, again, we'd like an adult. We'd like somebody who's understands the importance of what they're doing. Next up, our team is registered for the February 6th qualifier, and it looks like it will likely be canceled. So I'd say, hold on. I like to be optimistic. Things are getting better. Let's wait a little bit before we make that decision. Um, we've also registered for the 228 qualifier. In the event that the 2.6 gets canceled, can we register for a date earlier than 228 without fee? So again, with the way our cancellation policies work, your 2.6 registration would disappear, and you would have the ability then to register again as if you were a second play team, right? You had a 2.6 and a 228. So your 2.6 would disappear and you'd have just the 228 left. You'd be able to register again. And there wouldn't be any additional charges beyond what you'd already paid, right? We would use the fees from the 2 that you'd already registered for to take care of what the 2 that you ended up in. See, next up, were there any tech issues at the Google tournament using the Zoom platform? If so, are the judges flexible with the interview timing? So the interview timing is actually designed with some flexibility in it. And so it isn't designed to be overly optimized. We started off being conservative, assuming that there were going to be some problems. We did have a couple of hiccups. We understand the hiccups and we believe that they won't happen again. The judging rooms that the teams will be operating in for the day will be open up at 7 a.m. the morning of the tournament. So there's plenty of time for the teams to be able to get in, get everything figured out, and make sure that they're well connected. So we don't anticipate that any of the problems. And like I said earlier, even with our hiccups and trying to have to debug them live during the event, we still finished the day on time. I think there was one team that had issues with not getting into their rooms in the right time and missing the beginning of the judging. We were able to squeak them in and still get everything done on time. Do you have any tips and guidelines for teams to work and build remotely or safely? So I'll point to first for the answer to this question. They've got a whole lot of resources they've been pulling together for teams to try to help manage what you can and can't do. The one part of the question that you didn't actually state, but is sort of implied, is together, right? And that's the one I really can't answer for you. What you can do together depends a lot on where you are, right? So for example, the greater Sacramento region in our state is no longer under the regional stay-at-home. So then it would fall back to what are the county's rules? So, if you're in, for example, Placer County, you'd need to look at what Placer County's rules are for gathering. So I believe most of the counties have very similar rules. I know in the Sacramento County, I went and looked yesterday at what their rules were. In the Sacramento County, under the purple tier, they're allowed to do outdoor gatherings with no more than 3 households represented, but nothing indoors, right? So this time of year, that may or may not be possible, depending upon where you live, what the rules are for your county, and what the weather looks like. Let's see, a lot of good questions. What I really like is everybody's still trying to figure out how to keep things working. And that's the thing we really like, is we want to try to figure out how to make this work so that we can do everything that we possibly can. Let's see, so this is about the re-registration. So if you want to re-register for an event, will we have to pay that once again before the fees for the first event is refunded? So what we're actually trying to work on is effectively just transferring your fees from the canceled event to the events that you register for afterwards, right? That's one thing we didn't actually talk about in the description. We're not going to put you into events. We're going to reset your registration so that you can pick what fits into your schedules. But the registration fee itself is still remembered and will be applied to your events as you register. Yeah, let's see, when is team schedule for judging released for each event? It's approximately 4 to 5 days prior to the judging day. I think for the Google event was on a Saturday, and we sent out the schedule of information to the coaches either on Wednesday or Thursday prior to the event. Let's see. Oh, last Wednesday we canceled the 23rd and the 24th tournaments. Was a survey done, and you found that many teams were able to staff a team within one family? We did not have time to do a survey. That was not something that was understood as a possibility. When we looked at that point, everybody was under regional stay-at-home orders, and we looked at the team demographics for the teams. And there wasn't, one of the events was short teams. It didn't have the full 12 teams anyway. So it was going to get canceled whether or not we were under stay-at-home orders. The other event it was less than full. By the time we started going down through and eliminating teams out based on understanding community versus school and what counties they were coming from, we again got below 12. And so at that point, it wasn't going to be a viable event. So again, the survey that's coming is to help us understand more. But even if we get, for example, 8 teams at an event that say they can work within the one family model, that still doesn't get us to the 12 teams we need to have to be able to field an event. And if only 8 teams out of my region of 156 teams are able to do that, I'm not sure it's fair to the other 148 teams to hold events for just those 8 teams, right? At that point, I don't qualify as a region in first parlance of regions. Oh, here's a nice question. Where is this FTC Q&A forum where we can get the information? So the easiest way to get to it is to go to the firstinspires.org website and follow through to the game and season information for First Tech Challenge. Easiest way to do that is when you load the First Inspires website, you'll see a banner across the top. One of the items says programs. When you hover over it, it'll pull up a pop down. Go to First Tech Challenge, game and season, and there's a whole lot of good resources there. All of those remote event resources that I mentioned earlier, they're also linked off of that same page. So you should be able to find a link to the forum, a link to all of the remote resources, a link to the game manuals, both the traditional and remote. So everything should be there. Okay, next up. Does the engineering portfolio need to be turned in before match play starts or just before the judging day? So we're using an upload process through a tool called JotForm. It's the same tool we'll likely use for doing the survey that allows us to collect the information. There is a deadline for that, and it is more than just the day before the judging event. We need to actually be able to go through and verify that things uploaded well. Like all good upload utilities, they don't always work well. And we need to make sure that when it comes time for the judges to actually look at your engineering portfolio, that it's good. And so that there is a deadline that is a day or two ahead of the judging day. So don't expect to work on it all the way to the end. Be prepared to upload it a couple of days ahead of time.
A little extra on that, Mark. We ask that all of the information is submitted through the JotForm by the Wednesday prior to your event, but we do allow you to update any of those prior submissions through about noon on Friday.
And so that's Friday if it's a Saturday event, or Saturday if it's a Sunday event?
Both are for Friday because we have a lot of work to do for both of them, and during one tournament day, we're not likely to get back to support the other one. So
That's
it's
right.
a Wednesday deadline for either weekend day for all the submissions, and update submissions Friday at noon.
So that's an important point. Many of our weekend events in the times going forward into February and March, there are multiple events in a weekend. So you really need to make sure, even if you're on the Sunday, don't blow off those weekday deadlines, because our ability to help you adapt is going to be very limited because we're going to be engaged with the other event. It was mentioned that we are allowed to share pictures of the robot during the interview. Can you confirm this to be correct? You can share pictures, you can share slides, you can share just about anything that you can put on a computer screen. You can share a short video. Um, Keep in mind that your judging interview still does have basically the same time limit it has always had, and you shouldn't want to think about like planning on giving them a 15-minute video to watch. Um, so as an example, you may have something really cool about the robot, and the best way to talk to the judges about it is by giving them a chance to see it do its thing. Um, Offering that a chance for the judges to watch that real quickly during your presentation portion of the judging interview would be absolutely okay.
I also want to point out that Zoom does offer free licenses to people with a 40-minute limit. So we highly recommend that you are familiar with it, with the different settings to make sure that your videos with audio or with just video come through most clearly. There are some settings that you can optimize some of those kinds of features, but definitely play with it and know what you're doing before the presentation day so that you can maximize your 5 minutes.
Um, Key there is practice, practice, practice. So some things to think about as you're practicing. We have locked down some of the features of Zoom. So there is no chat in the team rooms. There is no whiteboard in the team rooms. I think those might be the two important ones, right? So don't plan on using either of those two features. It was one way to guarantee that we were being respectful of the first youth protection policies, right? So that all the conversations were open and shared with everyone. Your coaches will be the hosts for your session, right? So they'll be managing the session for you while everything's going on. Let's see, next up on the list, we can sign up for events that don't have our city on it, right? Like someone in Fremont can sign up for Cupertino. Absolutely. The cities are just about where the host team is from. Traditionally, when we're hosting the in-person events, that gives you a clue as to how far you'd have to travel. So we debated this year about going to other kinds of names, but we didn't want to really move too far away from our standard method so that when we shift back, it still feels relatively the same. Plus, it's a nice way to see, events being hosted by teams from all over the place. So every event on our schedule can be signed up for by any of the teams in our region. Is it likely that the 1:30 qualifying tournament will be canceled? Or will you have survey results before Wednesday? I don't think there is realistically any way that we could have survey results before Wednesday that would give us the ability to have that be the influencing factor on whether or not the event will be canceled when we make our decision on this coming Wednesday, right? So I don't want to, again, I'm a little bit of an optimist. My wife tells me all the time, you're the optimist. I like to hold out hope that things will get better. The realist in me says, it's not very likely, but we like to delay the decisions as long as we can in the hope that things are going to get to the state where we can move forward. But the survey results will, I don't see there any way that unless all of you coaches from all 156 teams will jump up and swear to get us an answer back within an hour when we send you the survey, right? Other than that, there's realistically not enough time for us to be able to process the information, to be able to understand what can or can't be done. We would have to then also take and map it onto the teams in that event, right? So there's a lot of challenge to that. And the survey form itself doesn't exist yet. So we need time to create it and figure out what questions we need to ask to be able to get the information. So we need to keep it, we haven't created it yet. Let's see, what media do you recommend we share in the pit? So I'm not sure what you mean by what media. So we have a way of pre-sharing. So for example, there were teams that had a YouTube playlist of the matches that they had played, and they pre-shared that as something to share with the other teams that were coming to the event. The pit room is really just a Zoom room. It gets used for three things: a morning judging session, an afternoon judging session. Every team's going to get a second visit from judges as part of the event day. And then for teams that opt in, we open it up. So during those morning and afternoon judging sessions, it's accessible only by the team and the judges. The later in the afternoon, for teams that have opted in, we allow anybody else who's opted in to also be able to access that room, and it gives a chance, for example, like it's like in a traditional event, having another team show up at your pit table and talking to you about your robot, right, and having a little discussion back and forth, right? So that's kind of the model. The pit sharing, the team sharing, is something a little bit distinct from that, and it's just a way for the teams to share information about what they've done, right? So if you want to see examples, the easiest thing to do would be to go look at that set of examples from the Google event, right? That would be probably the ideal place to look.
Mark, currently that Google event page is gone because the event has expired. So we can post it and we'll let you know where we post that.
Yeah, so the page is still there. It's just the link isn't published in the list of events. So if we can just figure out how to get the link and figure out how to put it somewhere that's accessible, it's still there. Uh-oh, next up, it's a long question. Let's see, is there any chance of the season next year being adjusted to give teams more opportunities to practice? I've got a majority underclassmen team. I'm worried about what will happen next year when I and other upperclassmen graduate. For example, Science Olympiad arranged more practice invitationals for teams this season because many competitions were canceled last season. Will there be something similar? So I don't know what's going to happen. Our biggest challenge is a lot of what goes into First Tech Challenge requires people coming together. So the remote event was an effort to try to minimize that, but under the current state requirements, even the remote event is hard, right? You're really looking at only teams that come from one family are able to perform their matches. So that's really tough and challenging. I know there's been discussion in some of the other FIRST programs of having sort of unofficial events that extend. So for example, our First Leg League program, after their season is complete, they're thinking about doing additional events in the spring. So that's something that we certainly can consider. I don't have an answer to that question yet. It's still something we're still trying to figure out how to survive the first season. Keep asking the question. We would like to see the teams continue to learn and grow, and participating in events is one of the ways that they learn and grow. Sorry, I don't have a more concrete answer, but I also don't want to mislead you. And I think I actually caught up with all the questions, which is just stunning. Usually people keep ahead of me. Again, if you got any questions, go ahead and take a chance to go type them into the question box. Again, we understand this is frustrating for you. The understanding whether or not there's going to be an event. When we wanted to try to spend a little bit of time this evening and help you guys all understand the process we go through, why we make the decisions we do, and the timing for when we can get you more information. And it frankly is a little heartbreaking for us to have to cancel the events. Personally, I went to all but 2 of last year's events. I enjoy watching the robots. I enjoy seeing the spirit of competition amongst the teams, and I really enjoy hanging out with the other volunteers. And it's heartbreaking not to have that, but we want to try to give you guys as much information as we can, because in some sense we're all in this together. Questions?
One thing I want to point out is both of the first 2 weeks in February, those tournaments have a very low registration right now currently. So in addition to the frustration of having to cancel for COVID, we have 156 teams, and I know teams are building and they'd like to play. So if you have a team and you're thinking, well, we'll save a play for later in the season, consider playing early. Consider signing up for some of those February events so we don't have to cancel more events because we don't have enough teams.
Yeah, and please, when the survey comes, please take time to answer it, right? Because it really is going to help us understand, the answer to the question, for example, should we change the date of our championship and extend our season into April? Or should we end our qualifying season in March and just to stick to the championship in April, right? Uh, Help us understand your team's work environment, right? Are you able to field a robot in a mode that meets the current regional stay-at-home orders, right? No gatherings. Uh, do you have resources, for example, if you were in the Sacramento region, do you have resources to be able to play your matches outdoors? Right? Is that something that your team could manage? So be prepared to answer those questions and quickly, because the better information we get from you, the more we're going to be able to understand how to adapt as we work through the challenges we're facing. And for the handful of you who are offering thanks for the sharing the info and for trying to keep things going, we appreciate it. It is a challenging, trying time. It has been the one positive is that everybody seems to be adapting to this graciously and understands that everybody's just trying to do everything they can to make this work. If there aren't any additional questions, we don't have to hang on the line. The goal really is to try to give you guys as much information as we could. And again, apologize, we don't have all the answers. There's still a lot to figure out. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop the recording.